The silence in that conference room was a physical thing, thick and heavy like the reinforced walls around us. My brother Mark, the celebrated VP of a major defense contractor, had just concluded his pitch for Project Chimera. He sat back with a smile that oozed victory, a look he'd perfected over a lifetime of getting exactly what he wanted. Every eye in the room, the colonels, the senior analysts, the entire acquisitions board, turned to me. Then, the man at the head of the table, General Davies, a figure whose reputation was forged in steel and procedure, fixed his gaze on me. Mark shot me a little smirk, a condescending flicker that said, "Go on, do your little rubber stamp approval so the adults can talk." I placed my hands flat on the cool mahogany, rose to my feet, and let my voice cut cleanly through the stillness. "General," I said, meeting his gaze directly, "Project Chimera is a non-starter." The smirk didn't just fade from my brother's face. It was wiped clean, replaced by a slack-jawed confusion that was profoundly satisfying. Just 30 minutes before, we were standing in the polished gray hallway outside that very room. I was in a quiet, professional discussion with General Davies about the meeting's agenda. Suddenly, Mark appeared, a whirlwind of expensive tailoring and loud charisma. He bypassed me completely, clapping the general on the shoulder with a practiced familiarity that made my skin crawl. "General, good to see you," he boomed. "Don't worry, we won't bore your staff with the technical details." He jerked a thumb in my direction, not even bothering to look at me. "Jenna here is just base traffic control, keeps the planes from bumping into each other so we can do the real work." He actually winked. He winked at a 2-star general, expecting a shared moment of condescension at my expense. The joke landed and died in the sterile, silent air. In that one dismissive phrase, I didn't just hear his words. I heard my father at Thanksgiving calling Mark a captain of industry while I was just reliable. I saw my mother's polite, vacant smile when I tried to explain my last promotion. It was the weight of 1,000 dismissals, 1,000 moments of being treated like a footnote in my own family's story, all delivered in a single arrogant flick of his thumb. A familiar coldness settled deep in my bones, but this time it wasn't resignation. It was fury sharpened to a fine, quiet point. General Davies' face remained a perfect mask of military discipline, but I'm an expert in observing details. I saw the slight tightening at the corner of his eyes, the subtle shift in his posture. Mark hadn't just insulted his sister, he had publicly dismissed the authority of the one person in the room whose entire job was to be the ultimate gatekeeper. He chuckled, thinking it was just another joke at my expense. He had no idea he'd just belittled the one person in the room with unilateral authority to kill his project. To understand the reckoning that followed, you have to understand the 2 lives I was living. To really grasp the chasm between my 2 lives, you have to picture our family at Thanksgiving. The entire day was an orbit around a single blazing sun, my brother Mark. He wasn't just sharing work news. He was holding court at the head of the dining table, spinning grand tales of his firm's upcoming bid for Project Chimera. He painted himself as a visionary, a patriot developing a revolutionary drone defense system that would change the very nature of modern warfare. He spoke of billion-dollar projections and meetings in Dubai as if he were discussing the weather, and our family soaked it all in with rapt attention. My father, Robert, a man who spent 40 years as a mid-level manager and measured a person's worth by their job title, beamed at him. He raised his glass for a toast, his voice thick with a pride he never showed me. "To my son Mark," he declared to the room, "a true captain of industry." Everyone applauded, caught up in the performance. It was always a performance. Later, while clearing dishes, I found a quiet moment with my mother, Diane, a woman whose life mission was to keep the peace by keeping Mark happy. I tried to share my own news. "Mom, I got the promotion," I said softly. "I'm a GS-15 now. It's the highest civilian rank I can get in my career track." She paused from loading the dishwasher to pat my hand, her eyes already scanning the living room to make sure Mark's glass was full. "That's lovely, dear," she said, her voice laced with a gentle, unintentional condescension. "It's so nice you have such a stable government job." Stable. That's all they ever saw. Safe, boring, and stable. To them, my career was a quiet, gray cul-de-sac compared to the 6-lane superhighway of Mark's ambition. They even had a nickname for me, one they'd use with their friends. Tower Girl. It was their shorthand for my job on a military base, a name that painted a picture of me in a glass box with binoculars. a menial observer to the important work men like my brother were doing. It was easier for them to believe that than to understand the truth. The truth lived in a different world entirely, a world of absolute silence and consequence. My real office was a skiff, a sensitive, compartmented information facility. It's a room designed to be impenetrable, a vault where the nation's secrets are handled. There are no windows, the walls are shielded, and the only sound is the low hum of encrypted servers. In that world, there is no empty charisma or grandstanding. There is only data, and the stark binary reality of compliant or non-compliant. I remember leading a red team review for a different multi-million-dollar proposal, a satellite communications upgrade. The schematics and budget spreadsheets filled a massive screen, a river, of numbers and technical specifications that I had to navigate. I calmly pointed to a section of the code. "There's a critical vulnerability here," I stated to the room of engineers and project managers. "The contractor's data security protocol has a back door. It's subtle, but it's there." A senior engineer, a man with 3 decades of experience, pushed back immediately. "It's within acceptable parameters, Miss Reed," he said, his tone bordering on dismissive. The room grew tense. He was challenging my authority. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply turned to him and said, "According to DoD Directive 8570. And the specific language in FAR Subpart 4.19, acceptable is not the standard. Secure is. The finding stands." The argument was over. Observing from the back of the room, General Davies gave a single, almost imperceptible nod of approval. That nod was the loudest praise I had ever received. In that room, I wasn't Tower Girl. I was the final word. My authority was absolute because it wasn't built on charm. It was built on being irrefutably correct when billions of dollars and national security were on the line. My parents could never comprehend that world. My father saw Mark's ambition as a reflection of his own unfulfilled dreams of corporate glory. He worshipped the prestige of Mark's company because it felt like a legacy he could finally claim. My mother, the family's chief emotional officer, simply saw Mark's high pressure job as something that required constant management and encouragement. "You know how your brother is," she would tell me, as if it were an excuse for everything. "His work is so demanding. He needs our support." Their logic created a closed loop of enabling. Mark's success required their fawning attention, and my quiet, meticulous service was seen as a lack of drive. They saw his arrogance as confidence and my competence as stability, a boring, safe, and utterly unimportant quality in the shadow of their golden child. They had no idea that my stable job gave me the power to protect the country from the kind of reckless ambition my brother embodied. For years, I had tried to earn their respect in their world of flashy titles and big bonuses. But after that comment in the hall, I realized I didn't have to. Mark had just swaggered into my world, governed by my rules. And I was about to teach him the language of consequences. Back in the quiet solitude of my office, the minutes ticking down to the meeting, my brother's words echoed off the blank walls. "Just base traffic control." It wasn't the insult that stuck. Not really. It was the absolute certainty behind it, the lifelong baked-in assumption that he operated on a higher plane where the tedious rules that governed people like me simply didn't apply. He believed his charisma was a key that could unlock any door, and that procedure was just a suggestion for the less important. And in that moment, a switch flipped within me. This was no longer just about the flaws in Project Chimera. This was about the foundational flaw in his worldview. My objective shifted from simply identifying a problem to delivering a consequence. I would not just recommend denial to the board and let them debate it. No. As stipulated in my official charter, in cases of a critical integrity failure, I had the full authority to deliver the final verdict myself. This wouldn't be an emotional confrontation, it would be a procedural execution. With a new sense of cold purpose, I pulled up the final compliance review for Project Chimera on my secure terminal. My screen filled with the data I'd been living with for weeks. I had already flagged several issues, the usual overly optimistic timelines and questionable budget lines, but I scrolled right past them, down to the kill shot. It was a clear, disqualifying violation of FAR Subpart 9.5, the section on organizational conflicts of interest. 3 months ago, Mark's company had acquired a small, specialized consulting firm. As it turned out, that same firm had been contracted by the government 2 years prior to help draft the initial technical requirements for this very project. He had bought the company that wrote the test, and now he was trying to ace it. It was a massive, unethical breach he had tried to bury in a single line item. In an obscure financial disclosure footnote, certain no one would ever find it. He assumed no one would do the work. He assumed I wouldn't. My fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. I drafted a concise, encrypted email to General Davies' executive officer, a man I knew valued protocol above all else. The subject line was Clinical Ref Project Chimera Gate Review, PIO Finding. The body of the email was a single, powerful line. Sir, please confirm the General is aware of my final determination regarding FAR 9.5. My recommendation is now a formal decision. I hit send. The wait was less than a minute, but it felt like an hour. Then the reply notification blinked. Confirmed. The General yields the floor to you when appropriate. Proceed. The trap was now locked and loaded. The email confirmations were my closing arguments. Mark walked into that room expecting a negotiation. He had no idea he was walking into a verdict. When I stepped into that conference room, the air was already thick with a tension you could taste. It was designed to be intimidating, a sterile, soundproofed arena where billion-dollar futures were decided. My brother, Mark, and his nervous-looking team were on one side of a massive U-shaped table. On the other sat the Government Evaluation Board, a row of impassive faces, colonels, senior civil servants, and at the head of it all, General Davies. I was seated at the very end of the table, slightly separate from the main group. It was the designated position for the Program Integrity Officer, but to my brother, it just looked like the cheap seats. Throughout his entire presentation, he kept shooting me dismissive little glances. The kind you'd give the catering staff to see if the coffee needed a refill. He saw a piece of the furniture. He had no idea he was looking at the judge. Mark finished his presentation with a flourish, the final slide glowing with a multi-billion-dollar projection. He spread his arms wide, the very picture of a corporate titan who had just sealed the deal of a lifetime. He looked expectantly at the board, waiting for the wave of impressed questions, or more likely, the immediate capitulation he felt he was owed. But the room gave him nothing back but that deep, oppressive silence. His smile, held in place by sheer force of will, began to twitch at the edges. He wasn't in control anymore, and he was just starting to realize it. Then, the moment came. General Davies didn't thank him for the presentation. He didn't comment on the numbers. He simply turned his head, a slow, deliberate motion, and fixed his gaze on me. "Ms. Reed," he said, his voice flat, official, and loud in the dead quiet. "The board requires the Program Integrity Office's final assessment before we proceed." Mark's confident expression finally shattered. I watched the sequence of emotions play across his face like a film. First, confusion, as he tried to process the formal title. "Ms. Reed? Program Integrity Office?" Then, a flicker of dawning horror. He looked from the General's stony face to mine, and for the first time all day he truly saw me. The smirk was gone, replaced by a desperate, questioning stare. The world was no longer behaving according to his rules. I rose from my chair slowly, deliberately. The chair made no sound on the polished floor. I didn't look at my notes. I didn't need them. My gaze was fixed on General Davies, a sign of respect for the uniform in the office. A sign of respect my brother knew nothing about. "General," I began, my voice calm and even, "the review is straightforward. Project Chimera is fundamentally compromised." Then, I turned my head and locked eyes with my brother. This part was for him. Mark's company, in its acquisition of Tech Solutions LLC 3 months ago, created an irreconcilable conflict of interest under the Federal Acquisition Regulation, Subpart 9.5. They consulted on the very requirements they are now bidding to fulfill. I let the accusation hang in the air, a poison dart he couldn't pull out. His face went pale. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. I let him stew in that silence for a few heartbeats before I delivered the final blow. "This isn't a minor infraction we can mitigate," I continued, my voice like ice. "It's a fatal flaw in the entire proposal." I then turned back to the General, returning to the formal protocol of the room. "Therefore, pursuant to my authority as the designated Program Integrity Officer for this acquisition, your multi-billion contract is denied." I paused for a beat. "This board is adjourned." A collective gasp came from Mark's side of the table. His face, which had been pale, was now completely drained of all color. The carefully constructed world of the golden child, the captain of industry, had just been demolished by a single quiet sentence. He finally found his voice, sputtering my name like a curse. "What? Jenna? You can't. You're just base traffic control." Before he could say another word, General Davies stood to his full, intimidating height. He leaned forward, his hands planted on the table, and his voice was a thunderclap that shook the room. "You will address the program officer as Ms. Reed," he thundered, his eyes boring into my brother. "Your team's access badges are now revoked. Security will see you out." On cue, the doors at the back of the room opened, and 2 uniformed military police officers stepped inside. Mark just stood there, his mouth agape, humiliated and utterly powerless. The man who had entered the room as a master of the universe was now just a trespasser about to be removed from the premises. My brother had spent his life playing a game of perception and influence. In the end, he was defeated by a single, non-negotiable rule. A rule that I was there to enforce. After security escorted Mark and his team from the room, a new kind of silence fell. It wasn't the tense, oppressive quiet from before, but something clean and respectful, like the air after a storm has broken. The board members, who had been stone-faced statues, seemed to breathe again. They gathered their papers, but no one left right away. General Davies walked from the head of the table over to where I stood. He didn't smile. A smile wouldn't have felt right. Instead, he looked at me with an expression of immense, unvarnished professional respect. It was a look that valued competence over charisma, a look I had never once received from my own father. "That took integrity, Reed," he said, his voice low and firm. "You saved this program years of legal battles and a billion-dollar mistake." The other board members, colonels and senior executives, murmured their agreement and nodded toward me as they filed out. In their eyes, I saw that I had passed some unspoken test. The moment wasn't triumphant in a loud, celebratory way. It was a quiet, profound confirmation of my place in this world. I wasn't Jenna, the overlooked little sister who needed to be shielded from the important details. I was Miss Reed, the professional who had done her job, whose authority was now unquestioned. The name my parents gave me felt like a childhood memory. The title I had earned felt like my reality. 6 months can change everything, or it can solidify a change that was long overdue. I found myself in that same conference room, but this time, I was sitting at the head of the table. In front of me was a small, polished brass plaque that read, J. Reed, Director, Acquisition Integrity Command. My promotion had come swiftly in the aftermath of the Project Chimera fallout. The system, it turned out, had a way of rewarding those who protected it. I was now leading the kickoff meeting for the new, properly vetted contractor. This room was no longer a place of reckoning. It was simply my domain. I looked around at the faces at the table, and I felt a sense of belonging that my family's home had never given me. This was my true family. Not one of blood and obligation, but one forged in a shared mission. My team was a mix of sharp, dedicated civilians and no-nonsense military, officers who lived by a code of ethics, precision, and duty. They looked to me for guidance, not because of my name or who I was related to, but because of my judgment. We spoke a shared language of regulations and responsibilities, a language my parents and brother would never understand. Here, respect wasn't given freely, it was earned through diligence and integrity. And in that, I had finally found my peace. This was a foundation I could build a life on. One quiet evening, while working late in my new office, an email notification popped up on my screen. The sender was my mother. The subject line was just 2 words, "Your brother?" A cold knot formed in my stomach, a ghost of old anxieties. I clicked it open. It was a long, rambling message, filled with panicked excuses and desperate pleas. Mark had lost his vice president title. His company's ethics board was investigating him. His career, the shimmering centerpiece of our family's pride, was in ruins. My mother wrote about his stress, his humiliation, the injustice of it all. And then came the line that showed me nothing had really changed for them at all. She asked if I could just call them and explain it was all a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. They still didn't get it. They never would. There was no apology for me, no acknowledgement of the truth, only a frantic attempt to erase the consequences for him. I read the email a second time, and the anger I expected to feel just wasn't there. In its place was only a brief, flickering sense of pity for people so trapped. In their own narrative, they couldn't see the reality in front of them. My peace was no longer tied to their validation or their apologies. It was mine, earned and paid for. With a calm, steady hand, I moved the cursor and clicked Archive. I didn't reply. I just went back to my work. My family thought a legacy was about the deals you close. I learned it's about the lines you refuse to cross. My brother wanted to own the sky. My job was to own the rules that governed it. If you've ever had your expertise dismissed by people who should have known better, share your moment of vindication in the comments. In this community, we read the fine print.